No work today, and for a fair few more to come. More than 40,000 rail workers were on strike today. Less than a quarter of service is running. Financial agony for shops in the shadow of the station in York.
In monetary terms, I'd hate to put a figure on it. It's peak season, so it'll be, it could be hundreds, it could be into the thousands. We just don't know. Double cost factors for us today. So the cost of the fuel, the cost of closing the shop, and the cost of bringing extra staff in. So yeah, we can't do with too many strike days, sadly.
Workers from 14 train operators joined picket lines for the second time this summer. Why?
Well, you know the script. It's a cost of living crisis. Inflation's through the roof. Profits are going through the roof, through our industry into tax havens.
But you've been offered a deal though, haven't you?
We've been offered 8% over 3 years in return for accepting maintenance schedules being cut in half and thousands of jobs going. And that's not really an acceptable deal in the current state of play.
The RMT have called this latest offer an attack on our terms and conditions, and the 4% pay rise this year, followed by 4% next year, paltry. Network Rail, who they are negotiating with, say it's the best they can do.
Look, we've worked really hard on getting a good and fair deal for our colleagues at Network Rail. It's good because it's 8% over 2 years, no compulsory redundancy.
8% over 2 years is a real terms pay cut.
It is. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but when you put the package all together, right, it's 8% now, the cash bonuses on the table, discounted travel, all of that together, I think, is a good deal given the state of the railway.
It's not only a fair deal, say Network Rail, it's a deal which they say was not put to union members by union bosses.
So you went to the RMT with an offer.
Yep.
That has not gone to staff.
It hasn't. They rejected it out of hand. Now the TSSA, one of their fellow unions, has put that deal to a referendum. We think that's the sensible, democratic, right thing to do. What are the RMT afraid of?
More strikes lie ahead. This Saturday and 2 weeks later, train drivers represented by ASLEV will be striking, affecting 9 rail operators. In mid-August, the RMT and TSSA will strike, hitting vast swathes of the network. And on August 19th, London Underground staff will walk out too. But strikes are spreading. Royal Mail workers have voted overwhelmingly for action over pay, and now nurses and junior doctors are to vote on industrial action too. The Transport Secretary today said more needs to be done to remove the power of, quote, very militant and extreme left unions.
Everyone can see that they need to modernise. It's mad that we can't run a decent weekend service on too many of our railway lines because we have contracts, some of which date back to principles from 1990. From the year 1919, where Sunday wasn't a day where people would go out for leisure and what have you. We need to modernise our railways.
Modernisation is a story playing out in the swish but sparsely populated post-pandemic offices of our city centres.
It's a great place to be, it's a great place to work.
It's a great place, but where's all the people?
Well, the people today, it's interesting you used to say, they're probably working from home, a lot of them, because they couldn't get into the office because of the train strikes.
But does that actually make a big difference now compared to pre-pandemic?
Not at all.
In short, how many of us work has changed forever, which in turn has changed rail use.
We ask people to come in 3 days a week. Mainly because we think it's important for the culture of the agency, I think for people's learning and development. It's
and pre-pandemic, what were they doing?
They were doing 5 days a week in the office.
And are they still coming in at the same times? Are they still travelling between 7 and 9? Are they still leaving between 5 and 7?
No, I think there's been a cultural change in business in that, I think people now are embracing flexibility. If you've got to drop the children off at school, if your train's really busy in the morning, if it's really busy late at night, you travel at different times.
The story echoed across the economy, say the government, and ticket sales are down 25% compared to the pre-pandemic. Regardless of reduced revenues, says Labour's Sam Tarry, workers still need a fair wage, a message he took to the striking front lines this morning, despite warnings from Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer to steer clear of them.
Could you do one on mine? Do you mind?
Of course. Just.
Today, Shadow Transport Minister Mr Tarry was posing for pictures on the pickets with former leader Jeremy Corbyn. Is standing on this picket line worth losing your job for?
It's not about my job, it's about the jobs of 40,000 rail workers. They're the people that are actually making the difficult decisions today. All I'm doing is standing up for what's right and for what's just.
That sounds like a yes then.
It's not about yes or no, it's about being
It is,
really
you might
clear.
lose your job over standing here.
I don't believe I'll lose my job. At the end of the
But
day,
if you
that's
did,
not
is it
my
worth it?
decision. It's always worth it to be standing shoulder to shoulder with striking workers. I'm a trade unionist, first, a Labour MP, second.
Just 9 hours later, Mr Tarry was fired.
Keir has got to make the decisions Keir's got to make as the leader of the Labour Party.
Across the nation and across industries, this could be a long summer of strikes and union strife for both political parties.
Well, in the last half hour, we've had a statement from the Labour leader of the opposition, and in the statement, it doesn't appear that Sam Tarry was sacked over appearing on the picket line. It was appearing in the media. Their statement says, this isn't about appearing on a picket line. Members of the front bench sign up to collective responsibility. That includes media appearances being approved and speaking to agreed front bench positions. As a government in waiting, any breach of collective responsibility is taken extremely seriously, and for these reasons, Sam Tarry has been removed from the front bench. Well, whatever the reason, if it's for being on the picket line or being in front of the media, this has caused a furious reaction from unions. In the last half hour, the TSSA, we expect attacks from the Tories. We don't expect attacks from our own party. As a Labour-affiliated union, our union is ashamed of these actions of the Labour Party leadership. Just a couple of minutes ago, this in from Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham. The Labour Party sacking of Sam Tarry for supporting working people on strike against cuts to their jobs and pay is another insult to the trade union movement. Quite frankly, it would be laughable if it were not so serious. Look, trade unions have always been an awkward issue for Sir Keir Starmer. He's got to appeal to the middle ground. He doesn't want to appear too in bed with unions, on whose funds he is very reliant. Meanwhile, we're in the midst of a Tory party leadership contest in which both candidates, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, this is the one issue they are more than happy to agree on and talk about even more. Both resurrected a policy of Boris Johnson's manifesto to guarantee minimum services during a strike, and both want to go further. So we've got Sir Keir Starmer's discomfort, we've got two Tory candidates who actually agree on something and want to go any further. You can bet your bottom dollar we're going to hear much more of this over the coming weeks.
Paul McNamara. Well, one city that's been particularly worried about this rail strike is Birmingham, which is teeing up for the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games tomorrow. Our reporter Jane Deeth is there.
Well, these Commonwealth Games are the biggest sporting event in the UK since London 2012. So the next 10 days of sport is a big deal for Birmingham. So organisers needed industrial action on the eve of the opening ceremony and during the Games like a hole in the head, as they were expecting some 1 million people to be moving around Birmingham trying to get to the different sporting venues and see the competition they want to see. The message is that the Games will go on. They're laying on an extra 600 buses and trams and volunteers to try to get people where they want to be. But speaking to the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, he said the real pain is actually Saturday's planned strike by members of the train drivers union, ASLEF. He said he had pleaded with ASLEF not to walk out this Saturday.
It still isn't too late for ASLEF to call off their strike. And to be fair to the RMT, a strike the day before and strikes afterwards, but they have protected the Games, and I say thank you to them for that. And I would still appeal to ASLEF to think about this big celebration, this sort of coming together of the whole country. And please, play your part in that, not try to disrupt it.
What have they said so far?
They're carrying on. They're carrying on with their strike. They're being very deaf to the requests. And remember, people have worked for 5 years to plan this celebration, and really I think it's a crying shame.
As for the impact here at New Street Station today, normally there would be about 450 trains a day. Today, less than 140, so down by some 70%, the same for passenger numbers. And catching up with a few people whose trains weren't running, they said they'd had to fork out quite a lot of money, either on petrol for long car journeys or taxi fares. And while they weren't exactly spitting feathers about the industrial action, they were less than impressed and pretty frustrated at being inconvenienced yet again.
We're going to use the car because of the rail strikes. I can understand people's frustration, you know, especially with the timing of the Commonwealth Games and everything, but I think the government needs to sit down with the unions and work this out.
I work for a council. I'd love to strike because of pay, but no. It's not fair about those who have to go to work. You know, cost of living is bad as it is at the moment.
That's why they're striking, isn't it?
Yeah, but they can't just think about themselves. They've got to think about the other people as well. Other people have to use the services. Other people have to work.
Every day there is train strike and also train disruption. So it's very difficult for me to depart from Birmingham.
The main advice here is come to the games, but before you come, do your planning and work out whether you're going to take the tram, the bus or the bike to the venue.
Thanks, Jane. Well, this afternoon on a visit to Romford, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said if she became the next Prime Minister, she'd act to stop unions causing chaos across the country.
I will legislate to make sure an essential service is provided so that militant trade unions can't disrupt our country and our economy. We're facing a global economic crisis. We need to do everything we can to support people getting into work, and it's simply wrong for the trade unions to be trying to cause this chaos at this very difficult time for our country.
Well, her leadership rival, Rishi Sunak's also pledged to ban strikes on essential public services. Joining me now is one of his supporters, the former Chief Whip, Mark Harper. I mean, the truth is this was promised in 2019. The Conservative Party has failed to deliver. And as a result, we've got chaos on the railways now.
Well, Christian, I think it was a commitment, and I think both of the leadership candidates have reaffirmed that commitment. The obvious thing you're missing out, which I think is why it's not been delivered today, is of course we had the pandemic, which took up a huge amount of government effort and resource for the best part of 2 years. But we've made it very clear that we're going to legislate to deliver that commitment. And I listened very carefully to your report, and my sympathy was with the people that need to use that essential service, and also what Andy Street said about the Commonwealth Games. It's about the users of these services that we should put first. And I hope very much the trade unions can settle this without taking strike action.
Well, it's not just the railways that are going on strike, is it? I mean, if you want to limit their right to take action, should teachers be allowed to strike?
Well, look, what we've said is we want essential public services. And what we've done with teachers, for example, and other public servants, you know, their pay gets determined by independent pay review bodies. And Rishi's said that he thinks that's the right way to determine their pay. And that's what's going to be delivered. I think the government's agreed with
or
those,
doctors or any of those other people for that matter.
That's the deal, is that what we say in those essential public services is that we have independent pay review bodies that look at all of the facts. They listen to submissions from the government, they listen to submissions from the trade unions, from the users of those services. They take all of that into account, and then they come up with recommendations to the government. And the usual position is that the government accepts those independent recommendations and delivers the pay and conditions that are recommended. And that's what I think the government's doing at the moment, and that's what Rishi has said is the right way of proceeding. I think that's the best way of dealing with the challenges that you get in those essential services, rather than having it which hurts people.
I mean, this Conservative Party leadership contest is pushing you all further to the right. You're going to provoke a general strike.
Well, I disagree with that. Let me just pick up one important thing there. You mentioned public services. I mean, I think one of the big differences actually between the candidate I'm supporting, Rishi Sunak, and the other candidate is he's made it very clear he wants to stick with the health and social care levy that he implemented, which is delivering significant resources to the National Health Service to deal with the backlogs that have arisen as a result of COVID, and to deal with the challenge in social care. So actually what we've said is we want to deliver those resources. He's got a plan to reform the NHS to get it to deal with those backlogs, but you've got to put the money in and the reform. And what you can't do is if you get rid of that health and social care levy, you're not going to deliver the resources that we need to deliver those important public services. So I think his pitch is a very balanced one. Deal with inflation, fund our public services properly, and then when you've got growth going back in the economy, you can afford to cut taxes, and you have to do it in that order. That, I think, is the message he's going to take, which I think our members and the public are responding very well to.
He has changed his mind on this question of VAT on energy bills. I mean, he opposed it before, and now he's saying he will do it. And I know you'll say he always said he would do more for people's energy bills if needed, but it does look like a U-turn, doesn't it?
Christian, for the purposes of your technical people, I heard the start of that question, but not the rest of it. But let me answer it as best I can.
Okay.
So on the VAT cut, He said all the way through very consistently, right from February, when he first set out his energy package, that he would stand ready to do more to help people if the circumstances changed. And why he set out the VAT cut this morning was because it now appears that we're going to see a slightly higher rise in the price cap in the autumn. And he wanted to make sure that through the summer, people had peace of mind that were worrying about that, to know that he would deliver further help if that price cap were to go up. And earlier in the year, when it was an issue, he made it clear that it wasn't up to the size of the challenge. He delivered a much bigger, more generous package, which is helping some people with up to £1,200 towards that rise in energy prices. What's now expected on top of that is more modest, and I think the VAT cut deals with it very well. So very consistent with what he said.
Let's leave it there. Thank you very much. Well, the head of the RMT, Mick Lynch, joins me now. Isn't the truth that this strike action isn't working? You've had 4 days of it. You're not really getting anywhere. The government's talking about cracking down on the right to strike. The Labour Party's running away from you as fast as it can. You need to be more militant, not less.
Well, our strike action is working. We've been talking to the companies for nearly 2 years, and their proposal at the start of COVID was to bring in these changes and make mass redundancies and impose that pay freeze. We've moved those companies. Nobody's been made redundant in our industry, and our campaign is working. Our members are supporting this campaign in massive numbers, and so are the public. 2,500 people have joined my union since this strike action started in order to participate in this action.
But you say the offer's nowhere near good enough, isn't it?
The offer on Network Rail is nowhere near good enough, and we've had no offer from the train operating companies whatsoever. That's down to Grant Shapps. He wants this prolonged action. He wants to make an enemy of working people. He wants to clamp down on the unions because he's looking after his career in a future cabinet. He's following Liz Truss. Rishi Sunak's following Liz Truss, and they're all going to the ultra-right end of the spectrum in British politics.
Well, they all want to finally deliver on this
Keir Starmer
law.
seems to be following them.
I mean, they all want to finally deliver on this manifesto pledge and possibly go further. If you look at Grant Shapps' sort of list of things to do. I mean, the truth is that a general strike is illegal, really, isn't it, in the way that it happened in 1926.
A general strike.
But you've been talking about it.
A generalised strike would have to... Only the TUC can call a general strike, but they'd have to have generalised disputes in each of the companies. But pay and the erosion of conditions and mass redundancies are an issue in this country. The stripping out of conditions such as with P&O and the replacement of properly contracted labour with cheap labour is an issue that affects all workers. And I think there is a turn in this country. I think the Tories are out of touch, and I think Keir Starmer's out of touch, because people want a square deal at work, and they're not getting it. They're being ripped off, and they're getting poorer year by year. And none of the politicians on the front benches of either side seem to be prepared to address that through their pay packets and then getting them some proper employment rights. What we've got is the erosion of rights and the erosion of civil liberties.
But what makes you think a national strike, a general strike, call it whatever you want, would work, given that your strike isn't really working?
Well, we may not get a general strike in the traditional terms, but I think we'll have a wave of solidarity action. I think we'll have a wave of people coming into disputes. We've got a new set of trade union leaders who are determined that their members should have their say, and that industrial organisation, rather than asking politicians to resolve our issues, is the answer. We'll do that for our own strong arm if we need to, not by waiting for people like Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves to get their act together and sort out what their ideas are.
Well, you talk about members having their say. Network Rail say you need to put their offer to your members. They've offered you 4% this year, 4% next year, that's 8% over 2 years. And you're not asking your members whether that's good enough?
We are asking our members, and we've asked them directly. We had a meeting the other night of 600 representatives and activists across the country who represent those people, and they put back to us very directly and forcefully that this offer is rubbish and not going to accept it. It's 8% over 3 years. We didn't get a deal last year. We don't want to accept the conditions that they've put on it, and we don't want to accept the cuts to the safety regime that Andrew Haynes is forcing through.
But what would they need to get to as a figure? Because you said cost of living, you know. Now, cost of living is 11.8% if you want it to be. That's where RPI inflation is. I mean, you're not really talking about 11.8%, are you?
Well, at the time this deal should have been struck last year, it was 7.1, and we don't know what it's going to be going forward. So we can't predict what inflation is going to be. We know it will be a long way above 4%, which is what they're offering us next year.
Somewhere between 4 and 11
We will
is where
try
you're
and
saying.
construct a package of value with Andrew Haynes and his team. At the minute, Grant Shapps is telling him not to do that. And he's telling the train operators, which is 50% of the people in this dispute, to make no offer at all. And he's directly responsible in their contracts for industrial relations and the offers that they put to us. He's preventing this deal going forward because he wants to play to the agenda of the 160,000 Tory voters in wherever they emerge from in this election as they push his party to the right.
But are you not playing into the government's hands by being the militant union boss who says we'll keep striking? You know, they want to blame you for this dispute, not Network Rail, and you're delivering.
Well, we're not delivering it. We've been speaking to them for 2 years. We don't choose the timing of when they want to send me a letter saying that 3,300 of my members are going to get made unemployed by Network Rail. I can't control them typing up that letter and sending it to me. That's precisely what they did on the eve of this strike. So we have to respond to that. They've chosen this period and we have to respond, and our members are fully behind our response.
I mean, you've had a go at Keir Starmer in this interview a couple of times. I mean, do you fancy a political career yourself?
Well, I'm not a politician. I'm not paid to do that job.
I mean...
And I'm not a member of a political party. What I want is Keir Starmer to sort out his values and his message. He's got to sort out whose side he's on in this balance of power struggle. There are too many poor people in this country, and there's a poor distribution of wealth and power. He needs to identify which people he's going to appeal to. Is he going to appeal to the Daily Mail reader or people struggling in working class communities all over this country? If he wants to win back the red wall, he needs to identify people who are low paid and have got precarious employment. At the minute, he seems to be tacking to the right and punishing anyone that identifies with the trade union movement. That's not right for a party called Labour.
Mick Lynch, thank you very much.